Good afternoon, Winterview, back again with another brief dialogue for his dear friend Annastacey. This brief dialogue's topic is: where does the person live? Where do you live? Or more succinctly, starting at the beginning with the basics. The person is imagined to exist in the body, or as the body. The evidence seems overwhelming, so convincing that one would never question it. Indeed, even the questioning of it is paradoxical. I am questioning my existence. It doesn't even make sense. Why would I bother to question it? Therefore, it stays as a underlying energy dynamic, not just a belief, more than just a feeling in the body, a powerful sense of contraction, like a well-oiled stage performance. The audience completely convinced of the reality of the trick. But from previous dialogues, we know that the validity, reality, existence even of this independent person is uncertain. But what happens once this is firmly established as a fact? Once the person is completely acknowledged as an entity, as a separate thing, if you like, in the world? Well, everything flows on from that single point. That single point of reference stems forward a myriad, a branching, cascading effect that needs to be explained in the mind. The person, therefore, is presumed to exist somewhere, specifically in the body, or is the body, which I've covered numerous times. But it gets a little bit trickier then, because once we've established or haven't questioned the veracity of the existence of the individual, we need to start imagining more and more concepts to wrap around the individual, to make the story of the individual make sense. The individual, therefore, is hypothesized to not just exist as the body or in the body, but it's believed to live somewhere. Where does the person live? Where does the individual live? That question can be answered on multiple levels, each conceptual. Each level is an idea. I live in this town, or let's start even more simply, I live in my house. I live in my house is in this town. I live in a town. This town has a border separating it from the next town. Or perhaps my town is in a county, or a shire, or a district, or a region of some kind. This district, shire, county, or region exists, perhaps, wherever you are in the world, in a state, in a province, in a principality, and so on. In a territory, even. And that exists in a country. And my country exists in this region of the world, of the globe. This region of the globe falls in one of the two hemispheres of the planet. This planet exists in a solar system. This planet exists number 3 from the sun, if I'm not mistaken, third in line, going outwards, of course. This solar system exists in a galaxy. This galaxy exists relative to other galaxies in the universe. Perhaps there's more beyond that. So each one cascading outwards is a conceptual realm, the borders of which are imagined but not clearly defined. What do we know about these realms? Well, science is only really capturing the outer realms in any detail now, that is, space and so forth. We find if we go inward, it becomes problematic. Our definitions become all fuzzy again. If we go beneath the skin, where do I exist in the body? Well, not really sure. Probably the brain, maybe the heart. Where in the brain? I don't know. I guess the person part? Where's the person part? And so on and so forth. Fuzziness as we approach infinity in either direction. The realms in which the person live, as I said earlier, are conceptual. They are imagined areas. There is no such thing as a house. There's no such thing as a community, a town, a region, a district, etc., except as concept, as an idea, a culturally shared idea. We often forget as a species that our concepts are simply that. They're concepts, and they're not reality. We think the house exists as a reality. We forget that the house is rather an experience that we translate, you could say, into house or bedroom or floor even, depending on where you are. More interestingly, in my work in mental health, and I've thought about this quite a lot, we can look at the structures of the mind, so to speak, by looking at the environment where we find the person. At the moment I'm driving along a well-maintained highway. The lanes are clearly marked, there's signs, there's safety beacons of reflectors and distance signage. There are potholes, but they've been filled in and repaired by a council, so that represents that the road is monitored, cared for, and maintained. The cars that drive past me are more or less modern within the last 10 years. It's unusual to get a car older than that, statistically speaking. The road is making more or less a straight line between two towns at the moment. I see billboards besides the highway advertising fast food restaurants occasionally. I see trucks hauling freight driving past me. Who knows where they're going? Who knows what they are hauling? This is more or less a first world or developed nation. A developed nation is one where you could say that they've reached the apex or pinnacle of modern thinking about how a culture can exist or a community can exist. This is the apex of our civilization in many ways, where I am at the moment. I'm surrounded also by farmland. And the farms are growing crops, and occasionally livestock, occasionally both. And these farms are well maintained. They're farmed by heavy machinery. There's no one labouring in the field, as you might find in a developing country. There are power lines, and that obviously represents some kind of electricity grid across the territory, the region, etc. This is a modern country. The person is living in a modern country. If we look at it in terms of the mind, the person is living in the apex of thought. This is as good as thought or thinking about a country gets, pretty much. I mean, there could be some improvements, but broadly speaking. Or looking at it the other way, if I was in a developing country, we would see stark differences in the immediate surroundings, and I have lived in such countries, so I can speak with some authority here. The roads would be less well maintained, potholes, markings unclear, traffic rules violated frequently because of lack of enforcement. People would drive much the way they feel like it. Accidents are more frequent, more prevalent, frequently more fatal. There'd be less sense of development or planning in terms of where people can build industry or farms or houses. It'd be more higgledy-piggledy, a bit wherever you feel like, mate. The cars would be less modern, more patchwork, less wealth as you look around. The electricity grid, less well maintained, perhaps more erratic, perhaps non-existent. The farms would be worked by people more than machines. The people would be subsisting off the land more likely, rather than exporting crops around the world. They would be just farming for their daily needs rather than visiting the supermarket, as I might. There might not be street signs. I wouldn't know necessarily where I was, and if there was a sign, it might point in the wrong direction. The houses would probably be smaller, less modern, and so on and so forth. That would be living in a different mode of thought. The developed nation represents a different level of mind, you could say. So to answer the question more broadly of where the person lives in a conceptual realm of thought, or ideas. The ideas are manifest, you could say, around the person. You literally see the fruits of that level of mind. No doubt if I came back in a few hundred years, at least if the current trajectory was maintained, I would see more evidence of achievements of mind. So the person does not live in a solid world. It lives in a conceptual framework. Even to describe myself would require some reference to the concepts that surround me. As I would begin the narrative, I would probably state my name, then my career, and then I might say where I live or where I grew up, what I like to do as a hobby, and so on. All these things conceptual. So I live in this conceptual world of thought. The mind, therefore, can be looked at and examined, or rather the fruits of the mind can be looked at and examined to see where the mind is at. The developed nation is not wrong, you might think. It's not a mistake. It represents a way of thinking, you could say, more accurately. A way of thinking about how to be in this world. The developed nation is yet another representation of how to be in this world. There are cultures that criticize. There are cultures that criticize other cultures, which they see as fallacious or in some way impoverished or wrong in some ways. This is a misunderstanding, a misperception. This is a belief that they live in what they might think as reality, and other people are living in some sort of falseness, you could say, or have deviated from some golden rule that is unstated or unwritten anywhere. We often find that when we move between ideas, when the person moves between ideas, the person feels that quite palpably. If I move from a first world, say developed nation, I should say, to a third world developing nation, I would feel that quite starkly. There'd be an emotional response. I would actually feel a sense of movement between the two places, a sense of before and after, perhaps, giving the sense of motion, creating the sense that the person has moved somewhere from A to B, and things are different here. It's as if reality is different. The attitudes that you can look at the objects of the world and guess at what the attitude behind the object might have been. If I see a modern and well-designed town, therefore behind that must have been an idea about how to build a well-developed, modern town, somewhere in the back of that. Therefore, the current environment reflects a mode of thinking that you can track back in time. When you see litter on the ground, garbage, built up over many years perhaps, that reflects a mode of thinking. It takes some type of mode of thought to litter, to end up like that. Thinking around waste management or lack of waste management, or not thinking about it so much, or a lack of care, a lack of caring about one's environment. Not a problem, a different way of thinking, so to speak. So we can look at the objects and we can presume the mode of thought that led to the manifestation, you could say, in present time. And this all points back to the thought, the world as mind, the world as a realm of thought, rather than some kind of reality. The way we even describe the natural world will reflect our way of thinking about it. When we look at mountains and valleys and rivers and forests and deserts and oceans and all that, we could say the word, the label, but we could also describe it as best we understand it from our mode of thinking. We could describe it just with the place names, or we could describe it in terms of the ecosystem, the geological structures, the history of the area, and so on and so forth. Each one representing a mode of thought, a mode of the mind. And this indeed is where the person lives. The person lives in the world of thought, lives in the context of the past and the anticipated future. The person lives in countries, the person lives in towns, the person moves between towns. This is what the person appears to do. With the collapse of the false belief in personness, that event, you might say, commonly referred to as enlightenment or liberation, it all becomes a bit different in a way. It becomes two things simultaneously. It's not just, it becomes empty of, well, there's an emptiness perceived, as well as the apparentness of the old concept still running, so to speak. It's seen equally that form is empty, and that emptiness at the same time is form in appearance. Well, this is a very brief dialogue. Actually, no, not too brief. My usual time, approximately. This was just a brief descriptor of how the mind looks around and sees things, how it builds the narrative of one's personal existence. A look or a peek, you might even think, at the mechanics of the mind, just to shine a light there, you might say. That's all today, I think. A bit tired after a busy day. Thanks for listening. Comments, as usual, are welcome.